Looking at another method of growth now, looking at the point of view from the franchisor. In the last video, we looked at a case study called Second Cup, and I've just Googled it, and it actually is a real business that does exist. I've just not heard of it. So, we need to know, you need to make sure you know what franchising is. So the franchisor is the one that's going to set up the initial business, and then they're going to sell the rights to the franchisee, and they're going to get those annual royalties. So when we look at the advantages and disadvantages, the franchisee is going to be very motivated, more motivated than maybe a normal employee, a manager of another site, because they get to keep some of the profit. They're going to pay a royalty out of the revenue that they earn. So it's they're very much in the franchisee's interest to work really hard. So they get this very motivated entity working for them, so it should bring in lots of royalties, the percentage of the revenue. They also get paid that setup fee, and although they need to give HR advice, the franchisee is actually in charge of recruiting and managing the workforce. So that day-to-day running of the business is really taken out of their hands. However, the franchisee still takes a share of the profits. They're not giving all of that revenue to the franchisor. They're getting to keep it. I think the percentage royalty for Subway is something like 11%. So they are keeping 89% of that revenue. Not all of that will be profit because they've got to deduct their costs from that. The franchisor has to pay for the advertising, training, the administration of all the legal expenses of running this franchise, and all of those types of things. So that could be costly for them, but probably less costly than owning and managing all of the sites themselves. But they do have less day-to-day control over the management of the outlets. And so if something's going wrong in one of them, it might damage the whole reputation of that brand. Because to the customer, it doesn't really matter if it's a franchise or it's not a franchise. They just see the brand name. So if we look at a past paper question, very common questions, both on becoming franchisees and becoming franchisors. And you've got your advantages and disadvantages of being a franchisor there. It's usually comparing it with just opening up their own stores. But the key with these types of questions is really using the data. So we've got Judith Moore, and she runs a medium-sized business cleaning ovens called Cooker Clean, and she's got a small office and she employs 3 workers, and demand's really increased. She's had to employ more people and she wants to further expand. So the other option for her would be to just employing more workers and maybe having more offices herself, but she wants to sell this idea of this brand, this Cooker Clean name and business model to other places. So there might be other sites all around the rest of the country, and she would basically train people up, the franchisees up, and say, this is how you run your own Cooker Clean business. Okay, so discuss whether she should expand as franchisor. So a classic kind of structure, like you might talk about the benefits for her, you might talk about the disadvantages, and then you do an overall conclusion, linking back to some of this data. So she, if we're thinking about linking in these benefits, these things here, into pulling out some of this evidence here. Well, she's a medium-sized business. There's just her and 3 other workers. So it'd be quite hard for her to manage all of the sites if she just grew in a more organic way. So franchising would seem really sensible for her, because then she can get people that are very motivated to run it and take on a lot of the day-to-day activities, whereas it just doesn't really seem like she's going to be able to cope with this increased demand here. We don't have a lot of detail about how much she would be charging, but you can always kind of mention that there'd be a setup fee, there'd be ongoing royalties that she'd earn. I just wonder though, she seems to have set up, demand's greatly increased, so she seems to have a really good reputation. So could her reputation be damaged if she doesn't provide adequate training and the contracts that she sets up with the franchisees aren't specific enough so that they follow the rules? If they just do a shoddy job? Does that damage the whole brand? And people just think, oh, I'm never using Cooker Clean again because they didn't do what they said they would do. They were rude. They didn't leave my cooker. Like, it wasn't as clean as I thought it'd be, those types of things. So make sure with these questions, you're always using the data to try and explain the advantages and disadvantages, and then come to a conclusion that's justified for Judith, and her overall goal is that she wants to grow. So for me, just looking at this briefly, I would say that's probably going to be the best method of growth for her.